Mags, one of my dearest and closest friends in the world. So grateful that we are here together, sharing this platform to talk about you and your book, The Ugly Duckling Diary. Been super excited to see the journey, to be a part of the journey with you over all the years, to see the progress, to see it actually here live. And I'm very proud of you and I'm very excited for you to continue to share this message and this story. So, congrats to you.
Thanks. I know it's been weird. It's been quite a journey to do all this. So yeah, yay. But also, oh, this is not uncomfortable at all.
Exactly. No, but it's exciting. Again, you've always been a champion for vulnerability. You've always been a champion for allowing people to share their story. And I think this is exactly what you've done for yourself. I know you've always had experience here telling stories, writing stories, helping people get their stories out. But now it's your time to shine kind of on the big stage, if you will. So tell me, first question for you, Mags, is just give me some of your experience in just writing and telling stories. And that could be at any level, in any way.
I mean, I started writing when I was quite young. I there's a little thing here behind me. This sits here all the time. This is my first piece of writing. I was aged 3, and it says Oma, which is Dutch for grandmother. So that always sits with me as a reminder of how young I was when I started writing. There's not a whole lot of storytelling happening there, but hey ho. But it's that's always been part of what I do. I used to write a lot, all sorts of stuff. Really, when I was growing up, I used to write plays when I was in school, and we'd perform them in school. Um, so yeah, that's always really been part of who I am. Also, and also just looking for the stories and things, right? I did a little 1 year stint as a radio DJ where I sometimes interviewed people. My biggest interview to this day was when I was 18, I guess, in celebration of 150 years of the Dutch Constitution. I interviewed the then Minister of the Interior um, for national radio. So, this sort of storytelling and having these conversations and pulling story out of people has really been with me forever. When I co-founded Swan in 2013, that kind of solidified that skill set and that joy of storytelling and sharing stories into my professional life, because that's when, of course, I started telling my story as part of that platform, but also I was, editing for other contributors and talking to them about, hey, what should we be writing about? So then it really became a professional or a part of my professional life as well.
What would you say, Mags, really inspires you to tell stories? Where does it come from within, and kind of really what drives that passion to tell stories or write stories?
Well, I think that storytelling is the way that we as human beings learn new things. This is how we open our minds, right? Um it's how we can can at least attempt to understand other people's experiences, because being in our brain, we really only know how we experience the world. And that becomes our frame of reference. And I think the more we can listen to stories of people who might have different experience, or who are guaranteed to have different experiences, the more we can sort of be more open-minded, grow more empathy, learn about new things. It's how humans have evolved, right? We've been storytelling since we've sat around campfires. And we've used storytelling to warn against dangers. Fairy tales are often like cautionary tales, as well as as anything else, as well as entertaining. So I think it's just something that is so integral to being a human being, as a good story. Um, and I think, especially these days when there's so much information that is just sort of thrown at us all the time, to actually take time for a story, for it to be longer than 30 seconds, for it to, for it to go deeper, for it to be more complicated, for it to dive into emotions that maybe we're not all very comfortable with, for it to not be about how perfect a life is, but more how how complex and complicated and multifaceted we all are as human beings. I think we need these reminders so that we don't lose ourselves to this sort of outwardly driven imagery that we are just constantly being hit with.
Yeah, it's like what I'm hearing and what I'm picking up really is like it's all about connection. It's how we can
Well, it's
connect,
always about connection.
right? We've always used this phrase just in the work that we've done together over the years. It's all about seeking to be understood. And the more that we share and the more that we tell stories, whether again it be fairy tales for lessons, whether it be personal stories, whether it be stories of others to inspire other people, however it may be, it's all about connection and it's all about seeking to be understood, which is, I think, something that's been very powerful in your book and what you've put together, but also just in the work that you've done for others, for yourself, and the things that you want to continue to do with your business and everything else to bring impact to the world, as your sign says, here to make impact
Mhm.
behind you. How would you encourage, Mags, others to start telling stories or people that might be nervous or might be like, hey, I don't really want to share this? How would you encourage them or inspire them to be able to be open and tell stories?
I would always say start small, right? Like this, and I kind of had to learn this the hard way a little bit, is, you know, you have to, in order to find a place where you can tell your story, like find the safe places to do that, because we need that, we need to take care of ourselves as well. Like it's all grand to say, I'll tell your story because it can inspire others, and that's absolutely true, but don't do it at the expense of your own mental health, right? Like, because that's too much. And so but here's the thing, like, okay, so I wrote a book, so obviously I'm trying to reach more people. But really, if I can tell a story to a person, I will have impacted that person, right? Like impact doesn't always have to be big and the whole world and all of that stuff. But tell your kids your stories, or tell your, right, like, or tell your neighbors or your friends or whoever it is. But I think that sometimes we forget to tell our stories, and it can be really small silly stories, or it can be like, in fact, today I was talking to some people and we were talking about coffee and when we had started drinking coffee. And I said, I can't remember when I started drinking coffee, but I know exactly when I stopped taking sugar in my coffee. And the reason for that is because I lived in Denmark at the time. My Danish mom had brought the coffee upstairs to the living room and the kitchen was downstairs. And she put the coffee down and said, oh, I didn't bring up the sugar. And she said, well, you're just going to have to drink it black because I'm not walking back downstairs to get the sugar. And I was like, all right. And that's when I stopped drinking. It's this really small little story, but we connected as a group because we had a laugh, and then other people started sharing their stories of how, their coffee recipes changed over the years. And so like telling a story doesn't have to be a big rags to riches story. You can tell a really small story and it creates a connection because it speaks to people's imagination. It speaks to feelings that they will have had in the past, right? It speaks to, and it lets people see who you are, and it lets people get to know you as a person. And I think that that's important. Um, but it has to come from that sort of authentic place of sharing. And that's not always easy because we like to sort of present ourselves a certain way. But I think sometimes telling a story of something that went horribly wrong, or something that really traumatized you, or like these are stories that help us as humans not feel so alone, because we've all had these stories of grief, or of hardship, or we all go through these things, and somehow we try and hold all of that back because we feel ashamed, or we feel it, we that wound is still too fresh. But actually, in talking about it and connecting with others, and experiencing that you're not alone in that, it it helps that, right? Like it helps us put ourselves back together, which is exactly why I want the book to be out there, because all that writing is not going to do anything while saved on my hard drive. But it is going to do something for people who read it, and understand that all of that stuff, and especially, stories around abuse are so doused in shame, and we feel like there's all this sort of feeling of, what did I do to deserve it, or all of that stuff, right? Like, and that's really hard stuff to unpack, and for us to then say like, hey, I unpacked that stuff too, so let's do it together, is, that's how we then connect and share. But you don't have to do that with 100 people. If you can do that for one person, then you've made a difference.
It reminds me of our C's: connection, conversation, collaboration is really what can come out of sharing stories with each other, whether that be in a professional setting, whether that's personal, as you mentioned in that group setting with the coffee story with your Danish mom. Like, there's so many ways. It doesn't always have to be this big, huge, impactful, like you mentioned, rags to riches story, or it doesn't always have to be this big defining moment. It can be the small moments. Sometimes the smallest moments are the most impactful, or the ones that spark the most connection or spark the most conversation. I think it's really powerful that you really have been a champion for that, and have really shown that just in who you are. Again, I've known you for a while, for the viewers listening. But it's always been something, the through line to you as a human being is you've always been able to share, connect, converse. And again, whether it's a big moment or a small moment or a small story, big story, there's always connection, there's always conversation, and there's always, again, in the professional setting, there's always a lot of collaboration. Hey, let's work together because we can resonate on similar stories.
But even the sharing of a story, right? Like I said, like if you can share a story with even one other person and say, hey, the thing you are going through, you are not alone in going through, right? That is collaboration. That is a coming together and creating change or a transformation together. And that can be the most powerful thing that happens. I've experienced this a lot, where people go like, oh, but you know just having a conversation sometimes can just be the most healing experience you can have, right? And the other person might not even be aware that they are putting you back together, but they absolutely are, right? And there's, you said it as well, like we all seek to be understood, but I also think we all seek to be witnessed. Everybody wants to be seen, and seen in a way that comes from a genuine desire to know the other person, a genuine and wish to understand you and see you, and what you are about. And so if it, in telling those stories, we give other people the opportunity to see us. And I know that that sounds like it's a super vulnerable, scary thing, and it can be, but there's also something really safe about being in the company of someone who sees you exactly for who you are, who sees all the bits, the good bits, the bad bits, the complicated bits, and says, hey, you're a pretty interesting person. I want to know more about you, right? And we can only create that kind of connection if we can show up and tell our stories and be authentic, and connect on that common humanity.
Yeah. No, it's like I've always seen you as the guiding light, for storytelling, whether that be, again, helping others tell their story by the work that you've done with your business or just in everyday life with your friends or people around you. You've always been really that guiding light, or just that true hero in that aspect, right? Of just helping people and guiding people. This is how you can share and tell stories and the impact that comes about it. I know when it comes to your book, a question that came to me is, again, I see you as an expert in storytelling. And again, you've done it in many ways as we've shared. But was there anything this time around with the Ugly Duckling Diary that you might have discovered yourself? Again, you're an expert in telling stories. You know how to tell a story, you know how to write a story. But was there something different this time around that you discovered within yourself or just in general in the process?
I think um, I think I keep discovering things as I'm reading it. Because like part of putting pen to paper as well is that you take the story out of your own brain. Whereas in your own head, you can just kind of keep circling and swirling and sometimes you spiral out a little bit. But once you commit it to paper, the editing process becomes different. It kind of removes it from you a little bit. And every time I go through it, or I read parts of it for whether it be promotion or just because I'm reading parts of it to people I know or in presentations, but every time you go back into it, you discover a new angle, or you're like, it's sometimes it's like, oh, I forgot I knew that. And it's this sort of reminder to myself sometimes, like, oh, right, yeah, I've been through this before, because healing, as we both know, isn't a linear thing. So we go around in circles sometimes. So I think that is, and even if you don't publish something, like even if you just write it for yourself, write it in your journal, but going back to stuff sometimes can also sort of give you these moments of either, oh, I said something really clever there, that I forgot that I had that sort of moment of insight. Or you can go back and you go like, oh, sure have come a long way. It's this sort of, and I think that that's also a really powerful way to where writing and storytelling can help you just make more sense of where you are at. Because I think sometimes in the moment we can think, oh, well, life, because life is complicated and it gets overwhelming sometimes. But if we can sort of have these moments where we can go back to who we were last year or 3 years ago or 4 years ago and say, oh, actually, this puts into perspective the growth that I went through. And yes, I am still healing and I'm still growing, and you will do until the day you die, because that is just part of the human experience, regardless of what your story is. And it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, we're constantly transforming. And having these sort of moments where you can go back and see who you were before shows you that that is happening, even when you feel like you're stuck, because it's still happening.
Yeah, it's very much like that validation to oneself, whether
Yeah.
that be the reader connecting and understanding, but also just with yourself as the writer, as you're mentioning, right? You discover things every day, and when you go back and you reread it, and wow, that's how I felt at that time, or that's how I felt at the time I wrote it, or that's how I'm feeling now, reading it, looking back on both moments. So it's a
I
powerful
mean,
thing.
listen, I have lovely moments when people have read my book, will quote myself at me and go, but you know how to do that because you told it in your book. And I'm like, really? This is what we're doing now? And because sometimes we forget that something worked before, right? And because we're doing better. And so we forget to sit down and journal, or we forget to sit down and meditate. And so it's good sometimes to just get the reminders from yourself or from someone else that actually that helps me, and this is how it helps me, and this is how it made me feel.
Absolutely. Something just came to me. I've always asked this when it comes to just people that write stories, or something that I've always enjoyed asking when it comes to storytelling is it better to tell the best version of the story, or is it better to tell the right version of the story, or the more true version of the story?
What's the goal of the story? That's really what it is what are you trying to achieve through telling this story? And if that is, hey, I'm talking to a friend and I want them to understand me better and help me with what I'm going through, then tell the most honest version of the story that you can muster. If you're using storytelling in marketing, then make sure that it makes sense in the strategy that you're employing, right? Like, it's context is so important in that sense. But um and an honest story, like, you can be strategic about your story and still and it's still being honest, right? Like, it doesn't mostly, I think, how you present your story is more in what do I tell and what do I not tell, right? How do I curate it? How do I edit the story? And that's more about leaving things out than it is about telling half truths, right? The story still needs to be true and authentic because otherwise it won't do anything. Because people are clever about feeling that out. Um, but yeah, I am always in favor of being honest and authentic. But like I said, also protect your own mental health because people on the internet can be real bad word.
Very true. It could be a wild place. The internet can be a lovely place for a lot of
It's
things.
not your journal. The winternet, the internet, the internet is not your journal. In your journal, let it all hang out, right? So that's only for you. Nobody's going to read that. Maybe you are going to read that. Um, but I think as well, like there is something really scary, and there's something really scary in the run up to um, uh, you wanting to share a really vulnerable thing with a friend. And nine times, no, 10 times out of 10, the response that you're expecting is the response that you are giving yourself, right? Like you're sharing something that you are maybe angry at yourself or disappointed or whatever it is that you're feeling. Your friend is not going to have that same response because they like you. And usually we're nicer to our friends than we are to ourselves. So the anticipation of vulnerability is sometimes harder than the actual vulnerability. But then I also started this own conversation saying like, yeah, it's not at all uncomfortable to become visible and put this book out because it is really vulnerable and it is about me and it is stories from my childhood, and there are a couple of them in there that I still feel quite weird about because I am also still healing some of this stuff. I am not a complete package in that sense.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of healing still to be done, and there's a lot of things that people will resonate with, I'm sure. And there's a lot of things that people will take away and really understand and see you, but also maybe they feel like they can be seen as well themselves, whether it be a similar story, back to the connection and back to the collaboration. Question for you. I lost it, unfortunately. Oh, what would you say, Mags, would be kind of one of the core messages that you hope the book shares to the readers?
You are not alone.
It's powerful. It's very powerful because you're right. We might think that we're alone and we might think that it's just by us by ourselves, but there are so many people out there who can lend a helping hand. I've always used the song lyric from a Coldplay song, right? Help is always just around the corner if you ask for it or if you look for it. So that's really, really powerful that, you know,
Well, yeah, and I think especially in the context of abuse, like one of the strategies that abusers use is to isolate you and to make you feel like you're alone. So if you want to, like, getting out of that is in the realizing that you are not in fact alone, and there are so many people out there who share experiences or who want to help you, who can help you. So go and find the right people for you, and that really is at the heart, I think, of healing um, is finding connection, finding safe connections, and that is quite a process, but very, very rewarding.
all right. Very well said and very well shared. Appreciate your vulnerability and all your openness, Max, with this whole process and everything. I want to ask one more thing about healing. How would you say, Mags, the book, The Ugly Duckling Diary, has really helped you in the healing process overall?
Oh, that is a really big question. I mean, the writing of it, of course, is there's a lot of processing in that. Um, there's also, and um, we'll go into this a little bit more in next week's event, but there is sort of you're creating a little bit of distance between yourself. Someone gave me the beautiful advice recently when I was feeling really a little bit swirly about putting the book out. And he said to me, your story and your life experience, you as a person, and the book are two separate entities, and you need to disconnect them in your mind. And I think that was exactly the right thing to say. And I think it's exactly what the process of writing has been, is that slight disconnection between all that history that's in there, and how that has impacted me, right? And it's not that the story doesn't live in me anymore, but it lives there differently. And I think that is what healing is. It's not erasing the story. It's it's changing how the story lives within you. And next week I'll be talking to Lisa White, who also ran Swan Waters with me. She also wrote a book called Bodies in the Basement. And we are going to chat about her experience writing that and how powerful it is to put pen to paper